Αγαπητές φίλες, αγαπητοί φίλοι, καλησπέρα σας και σήμερα από τη φιλόξενη συχνότητα του New York College. Σήμερα Τρίτη, 13 Ιουλίου 2021, το New York College συνεχίζει αυτή την πάρα πολύ επιτυχημένη σειρά webinar, στην οποία έχετε αγκαλιάσει και είναι κάτι για το οποίο σας ευχαριστούμε θερμά. Σήμερα θα συνεχίσουμε με ένα πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον θέμα, το οποίο είναι νομίζω και αρκετά να κάνει με την παροχή ψυχικής στήριξης σε ανθρώπους οι οποίοι έχουν διαφορετικό σεξουαλικό προσανατολισμό. Θα πρέπει εδώ να αναφέρουμε πως αυτό το θέμα αυτή τη στιγμή απασχολεί πάρα πολλούς επιστήμονες από διαφορετικές ειδικότητες, από την πολιτική φιλοσοφία, την κοινωνιολογία, την ιατρική, την ψυχοθεραπεία, την ψυχολογία, φυσικά ακόμη και από τις σπουδές φύλου, καθώς υπάρχουν πάρα πολλά και φιλοσοφικά θέματα. Επίσης, έχουν ανακύψει ζητήματα με την ψυχική στήριξη σε αυτούς τους ανθρώπους, οι οποίοι σε πολλές περιπτώσεις έχουν βιώσει κακοποίηση. Μην ξεχνάμε ακόμη ότι και στην ελληνική κοινωνία, όχι και πάρα πολλά χρόνια νωρίτερα, οι άνθρωποι αυτοί ήταν ουσιαστικά υποδιωγμών υπό κάποια έννοια. Σήμερα λοιπόν είναι χαρά μας να είναι μαζί μας ο Ντενίζ Ουγιαννίκ, ο οποίος είναι ψυχολόγος και θα πρέπει να το πούμε και αυτό, είναι καλό να το αναφέρουμε, είναι και ψυχοθεραπευτής φυσικά. Είναι και υποψήφιος διδάκτορ στο τμήμα το δικό μας, το οποίο πραγματοποιεί σε συνεργασία με το Πανεπιστήμιο του Μπόλτον, μια πολύ επιτυχημένη συνεργασία στην παροχή διδακτορικών διπλωμάτων. Ήδη ο Ντενίζ έχει προχωρήσει πάρα πολύ την έρευνά του και του ευχόμαστε κάθε επιτυχία και φυσικά να εγκριθεί από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Μπόλτον και να πάρει και το πτυχίο του. Να σας πω εδώ ότι η ομιλία θα λάβει χώρα στην αγγλική γλώσσα, όπως και η παρουσίαση, και μπορείτε οποιαδήποτε ερώτηση ή παρατήρηση θέλετε, θα τη γράψετε στο chat και εμείς μετά θα τη μεταφέρουμε στον εισηγητή μας. So, Denise, the stage is yours. Denise, can you hear me?
Hello.
The stage is all yours.
First of all, welcome. My name is Deniz Uyannik, and I'm a psychotherapist, and for quite some time that I've been working with LGBTQI people, providing psychotherapy. And I am also a member of BACP, British Association of Counselors and Psychotherapists. And today I would like to talk to you about a special topic. Let me try to see if I can share my screen with you. Okay, here we go. So,
it's okay, we can see your screen, it's okay.
Okay, good. So, I know that not everybody that coming here is not mental health care providers or professionals, that you don't have to be one. You can be a student, you can be just interested in the topic. Therefore, when I am trying to provide information, I will try to simplify, but feel free if anything is not making sense, feel free to ask questions. Today, I'm going to talking to you about etiology of LGBTQI. So before talking about that, I know for some, it is a topic that might not going well with your beliefs or culture or religion, even though. But today, since this is a science cafe, that I thought that we will talk about how science see throughout history. And then we could try to see if there's a link that how we see LGBTQI plus people today and how we seen before. Today, I will talk to you about many models and theories, people, even Freud himself. But I am not trying to convince anybody that one claim or one model or one theory is correct or other is not. What I'm trying to do is to give you an information throughout how scientists see and where we land today. And then hopefully throughout discussion that we can see if there is any connection, how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see LGBTQI plus people. It is important to see that for some, it might be a sensitive topic. Even for some LGBTQI people, today I will talk about some views that might not what they believe, but my intention is to provide information on the history rather than saying one model is correct or not. So this is to understand the history. And we will talk about almost last 100 years or so, how we see research and how people taught LGBTQI people and how they came to be. And last, despite many theories of origins of homosexuality is still unknown. This is important. Although these are all theories and models, we still don't know. There is no definite answer on the topic. So I've been talking about etiology. I mean, the word etiology comes from Greek origins. I think many of the people watching from Greece will can attest to meaning of etiology than me, but let me try anyway. Etiologia, meaning statement from cause or responsibility, or and logia from the speaking. But in a scientific term, as a scientific term, etiology is a branch of science investigating origins, sometimes also called science of causes. About LGBTQI plus people and their origins, there are many theories and views, and depends on cultural, religious, political, sociological, biological, and psychological, even philosophical. Although today I will talk to you about some that I won't have time to talk or maybe even full knowledge to give you on this short amount of time. Therefore, you will see some of the models and theories, not all. Also, I wanted to talk to you about terms that I will be using today. Although most of them are familiar, that we have an idea, I just wanted to make sure that when I talk about something, it is understood by everyone. That's why some of the terms that going through this talk that I just want to talk about. You notice that when I talk, I say LGBTQI plus. It is short for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, and plus means all other categories which is not in this abbreviation. But since we are talking about history, and most of the earliest scientific literature used the term homosexuality, I will be using the term homosexuality. I understand the term homosexuality itself can be a term that some people see as a terms of oppression, or some people that would not be preferred to be called homosexuals. But when we are talking that we need a common term, that's why I chose homosexuality as a common term. And it is a complex subject, look at the abbreviation, LGBTQI plus. Today, just before this talk, I checked, and when I see there are 30 different gender identity. So, but let's talk about identities. Sexual identity is defined as who this person is attracted to. You can be attracted to someone on your own gender and someone from opposite gender, or in some terms, not a gender, but specific. For example, you can be a pansexual and be attracted to the people that you find smart people that is interesting to you, regardless of their gender. And some of these terms can be used synonymously. For example, the term gay, the term queer can be used, same as homosexuality, same, it cannot be said by bisexuality because it is about a person who is attracted to both genders. And then there are gender roles. The gender roles is often used to define what society expects specific gender to behave. And oh, I forgot to mention about when we talk about gender identity, it is the biological gender and gender identity can be two different things. For example, a trans person can be heterosexual. So a person who might feel or who might believe that they're born as a woman, but they believe they're man and they are attracted to women. So as you can see, these terms can be quite confusing depending on who's using it. Therefore, that I'm using the term homosexuality in terms of this talk. Now, we said etiology or origins of homosexuality. There are many theories, but how do we decide our own place in social hierarchy? Does etiological explanations help us define our self-worth or others' self-worth, others' worth? So do we see some people less than others? Do we think that we are better? Do we think we are sane? How do we put, if there is a hierarchy in our thinking, how do we place them? And eventually this becomes into how we treat others. For example, do you think that a gay man is same as you? But do you also think if a refugee, and if a refugee gay man is the same as you? You know what I mean? There are many considerations, there are many factors that goes in where we define ourselves. Are we educated? Are we rich? Are we poor? Do we have social identities? Do we have gender identities? Do we have expectations of how we treat others that is imposed by culture or imposed by our own beliefs and information? So we must be quite careful when making arguments such, and we will see in a while, there are some arguments that scientists made, nature versus nurture. So is it something natural, or this homosexuality happens because the parents treat their children? Is it intrinsic or extrinsic? So do we find the motivation in ourselves, or do we find motivations from outside? Is it something biological, or is it something environmental? So it's not just how it is nurtured, but are there factors of environment comes into this, or it is just something biological? It's a variety of a normal. And more importantly, there are some questions that I'm hoping that you will ask yourself, even though I won't ask them to you directly. So are we trying to understand this topic objectively? how do we define ourselves within the society, and our understanding and subject, our understanding of the homosexuality guide our subjectivity. Are we treating LGBTQI plus people same as ours, or same do we treat that our family members or friends, or do we just raise one eyebrow? Do we see, oh, those people? One last thing that I want to mention is there are many theories that you will see just in a couple minutes. Each and every one of these theories claim to answer the question. But one of the important things that I would like to remind you today is you will see, even though most of the scientists comes up with these theories, it comes from stereotypical understanding of homosexuality. So let's start. Oh, there's one more slide. Another question that I wanted to ask you, why is it important to understand the origins of homosexuality, especially for the the mental health?
Denise, we have a question.
Sure.
What does extrinsic and intrinsic mean?
Oh, intrinsic, the finding the motivation inside means intrinsic, and extrinsic, sorry, I cannot pronounce it that good, is the finding the motivation outside. If there is a motivation for our behavior of homosexuality, of course. So, I am trying to tell you about the origins of the theories of homosexuality because I think it's a valuable way to understand cultural forces, discrimination, and how scientists and people interpret the world around them. For example, even if today there are some mental health professionals or there are some doctors refusing basic care to LGBTQI plus people. And is it because their own beliefs? If so, are they misinformed? Or the information that they collect, is it how they interpreted the available data? Because available theories and models, and especially for therapists, ill-informed origin stories like homosexuality can provide distraction from listening and understanding the person that is in front of you. And this can sabotage all this process. When we talk about theories about the origins of homosexuality, there are we can categorize in 3 ways. Narratives of immaturity, narratives of pathology, and normal variance. You will see, even though majority of these arguments started as narratives of immaturity and then became narrative of pathology. And then for last 60 to 70 years, narratives of pathology, which mean when I talk about pathology, I mean it is a sickness or illness, something of an ill nature needs to be treated. When I talk about pathology, many psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, or biologists, even taxonomists, seeing homosexuality as a pathological problem and the behavior as their symptoms. And then they treated people. And even if people that provide care believes that, how could we even think about, a regular Joe, under in quote marks, that, or you and me, or our grandmothers, grandfathers, or people would see them as normal? Because for some time, even science seen it as an illness. Let's start. The first theory that I'm going to talk to you about, even though it's a narrative of normacy, I would like to talk to you about first, because I think this is the earliest scientific paper or that I could find that talks about homosexuality. Ulrich was a man and claimed to have, there is a third sex, third gender called earnings, which represented the man's with a woman's spirit inside. As you can see, we now know that, the homosexuality is a large umbrella, and there are many people, there are women, there are people, but even now, when we look at it, this is some type of a cultural stereotype. But it is important because Ulrich used the term earnings from Plato's Symposium. The term came from Greek mythology, and I'm beginning to suspect that most of the things does. Aphrodite has an elder sister, which is the daughter of Uranus, which came from his dismembered body. Uranian Aphrodite, or earning, represented man's love for another man, because there was only Uranian's body that it came out of. You will see, just as many other theories, Ulrich's explanation assume attraction to a man is a feminine trait. Later on, when we start to talk about Freud, that he makes a similar claim. But now that we know, not necessarily. The Ulrich's claim in Victorian times, it is quite important because it provided the idea to masses as this is something else. This is a new sex that we never considered before. Like I said, when we talk about origins of homosexuality, stereotypical assumptions always there. So all gay men are feminine, or all lesbian women are masculine, is some of it. Although there are many different theories, let's take a look at something from 1994. Hamer and Coupland, they published a paper. They said, maybe there is a genetic factor that goes in XQ28 region of the female chromosome, X chromosome. They thought, maybe this causes homosexuality. And then their model goes on and says, sometimes X and Y chromosomes passes over. And when males get female chromosome, or females get male chromosomes, which end up as a behavioral crossover, and they said, their model said, maybe this is why this is happening. Later, there are many research later on that find that their model was not correct. But one of the biggest loopholes, or one of the biggest weakness of their argument, is males carries 1X chromosomes anyway. No one talks about that. Let's talk about narratives of immaturity a bit. Theories of immaturity does not claim that homosexuality is an illness. In fact, it is considered as a normal step in the development of heterosexuality. It is also defined as a passing phase to adulthood as heterosexuality. In here, I have cited Kinsey. The Kinsey was a famous taxonomist, made a research which overall disproved most of narratives of immaturity and pathology. But in here, Kingsley made the first research from 1948 about gay man and 1953 about lesbian woman, found out that 48 to 60% of the individuals who had homosexual experiences did not have later experiences. We will talk about Kinsey in future, but I put this example here because if you have a theory or model, and if you want to support your model and theory, it is really easy to cherry pick a research or a statement from a research and try to show it as a argument to have a better model or to prove your theory. Also, one thing that I wanted to talk about is we are talking about the origins and models in science, but we need to also make a distinction about what science does. It is, to me, the best examples that I could find, at least for humanities, which is, psychology or social sciences, we say, to find a way to make generalizations about people or societies or cultures or groups. So, for example, in this case, Kinsey made the research and made a generalization about 48 to 60% of individuals who had a homosexual experience did not have later experiences. And then there is a specific way or methodology to make these kind of claims or make this kind of research. But in order to understand or use any data, we need to take a look at how it is conceived, how it is research made, and how do they come into that conclusion. Therefore, sometimes you will see, even today, we will see many papers or research that is claiming something different than each other. And in order to really understand that, we have to take a closer look of each of the claim or each of the research or each of the model that is happening. So the king of narratives of immaturity is Freud himself. In his famous 3 essays talk about theory of libido. He theorized that adult heterosexuality as the result of the normal sexual development. He explained the etiology of homosexuality is a disturbance to innate bisexuality that occurs during the sexual development. It is a complicated sentence, isn't it? Let's make it a little bit simpler. Freud claimed that everybody is bisexual. And during the sexual development, if they mature enough, they become heterosexuals. If there were any other fixations, needs, or behaviors, he's seen it as a deviation from normality. His theory of libido or sexual drive theory includes certain masculine and feminine tendencies. Remember that I was talking about stereotype. It is to, let's think of a different example. It is possible to take whole students and tell them there are 2 groups. One group is successful, second group is unsuccessful. But how do you define successful and unsuccessful? In this case, the modern theorists ask, how do they define masculine and feminine tendencies? If this is a deviation, even though it's Freud claims that it is not an illness, but if this is a deviation, or if this is a problem, it's something out of normal, what is normal? How do you define normal in this case? Freud also claimed that life experiences such as trauma could have an impact on sexual development. If you remember that before I was talking about, is it environmental or is it nature? In fact, perhaps Freud is saying both in this case. He says it can happen with things such as trauma can have serious impact on sexual development. And he also explained anal or oral sex were fixations of libido. Freud also claimed that perverse instincts were repressed. So such repressed instincts could come out within the dreams, which is often dismissed as meaningless. So perhaps we have some bisexual deviances, again in quote marks, again by quoting Freud, and then sometimes it comes out in our dreams. And he actually sometimes seeing that, that he claimed there is a subconscious and conscious, and sometimes repressed, or the needs which is not fed sometimes comes out goes into our consciousness. So the repression mechanism, one did not function normally within the hysterics. Therefore, there was a risk of manifestation in consciousness, just like I said. And in this way, it came out as behavior or some symptoms of same-sex tendencies. He called the hysterics transform these instincts into displacement and conversions. Perverts, again, this is not my thinking, but this comes in Freud's writings. Perverts freely enacted their instinct, but it was not in conflict with their ego or consciousness. We can also call ego their consciousness, although you can make different claims or different definitions. Hence, the claim of neurosis are the negative or perversions. So I know that for those of us which is not familiar with the psychoanalytic writings of Freud, this means a lot. But in fact, neurosis is way of our insecurities, the way of problems that coming out. So Freud seen that neurosis coming out is a natural part of the project. Hence the claim of homosexuality is not pathology. It's not an illness, it's just our part. Again, Freud was not free of stereotypical influences. For example, he used the example of Leonardo da Vinci's homosexual identity. I think this was in one of his letters that he wrote into a mother of an LGBTQI person, asked for his advice. But he does an analysis of Da Vinci, and he says his identification to his mother, whom dated a younger man, such as Leonardo, later on many psychoanalysts think as, unfortunately, mama's boy, or that is overprotective and overbearing mother that provides too much attention to child and spends so much time with the child, makes them homosexual. This was many psychoanalysts thought. And then there are other there's a different side of that same argument. Some of the psychoanalysts said that lack of masculine fatherly influence, which is maybe father was not giving attention to the child, or father was not there at all. There was some abandonment issues. Later on, the contemporary psychoanalysis will talk about this, the Oedipus syndrome, or they talk about how the child learned about the taboos of sexual life, and they said it is a developmental problem that happens overly because of the lack of fatherly influence or too much influence from mother. Theorists such as Kohut theorize that it might be narcissistic in nature, resulted by lack of parental responsiveness. You're going to start to notice that lots of psychoanalysts or psychologists seeing homosexuality as part of the psychosexual development. But even though let's call it, even though visionary people out of their time, like Freud, even Bowlby with the attachment theory, some of you know, that was not free of stereotypical influences, because their way of seeing homosexuality, it's way different than ours, in a way that it was simple, and they have categories, and we can even say few of the analysis were even thinking about how they could fix these problems, because narratives of immaturity will come specifically problematic today. Because if you think it's a problem of immaturity, that means if that person matures, will they be fixed? Again, fixed in quote marks. Will they be heterosexual? Will that work? Can you treat or change LGBTQI plus person? Where do you make the line? When do you decide this person is not treatable or treatable? Or is it something that happens during the child's sexual development, and after person that completes that development, it cannot be fixed? There are many questions that needs to be asked, that could be asked. Another example is Sullivan. In 1953, similar to Freud, he theorized that the homosexuality was a necessary step for adult heterosexuality. However, he, unlike Freud, instead of biological instincts needs to be satisfied, he said interpersonal interpersonal relatedness, but both of them believe that external events were responsible for homosexuality. Let's think about what this means. Sullivan was saying that a child, while developing, needs to relate what's happening with other people, especially with their primary caregivers, which their mother and father are. And it is a way for them to adapt into a situation where they can have these tendencies. And Sullivan also emphasized that there's a growing need of intimate relationship. Because he says, Sullivan says, the model claimed that children between 8 and 10 years old no longer requires just parents' attention and caregiving. They need the playmates, child like themselves. And how they are treated, how they function in that environment, also they can adapt and become homosexuals. Let me make one more remark. This sounds quite familiar to Bowlby's and attachment with others, isn't it? Let's talk about narratives of pathology. But before that, let me check the time, how we are with the time. Okay. Before that, do we have any questions so far? Anything that we believe that is confusing or that you would like to have a little bit more clarification? I'm guessing there's nothing so far, so I'm going to continue. So,
Dennis, we don't have any questions, and I think that our viewers are just watching very carefully what you're saying. You're doing pure science, you're doing very well.
Thank you. That is nice to hear. But I also understand it is too much information to take in such short amount of time.
We're scientists, we give a precise information to our viewers.
Yes, we must.
Exactly, we must.
So let's talk about narratives of pathology. I talk about pathology a little bit, but some theorists treated homosexuality as a disease or abnormal. Narratives of pathology often treated homosexuality as a path deviating from normal of psychosexual development. Like I said, what is normal? How do you define normal? These are questions that needs to be answered, but in most of the time, especially with psychoanalysis, they take their models, this includes Freud, from what they see inside the therapy room or case studies. But we now know that is not a valid way to do research, because if you see only that people come for therapy for a change, there is a risk of assuming that their problems are shared by everyone else. So let's continue. Pathological narratives often assumes the following: heterosexuality is normal. Any deviations from the traditional gender roles or symptoms needs to be treated. It happens because of the external pathogenic agents or traumas and stray away from normal development. And just as narratives of immaturity, pathological narratives also tends to correct the person to normal. You see, I use the term correct because unfortunately this is what happened all since most of the time up until recently, that we see homosexuality as a disease. The earliest pathological view that I could find was in the Psychopathia Sexualis. It's in 1968, written by Krafft-Ebing. Krafft-Ebing was a psychiatrist, and he compiled a book of sexual psychopathology, including a range of sexual activities. These activities was not just included homosexuality, but homosexuality was part of it. Ebing claimed that homosexuality was an illness that ran against nature's design. He claimed that homosexuality was a symptom of nervous degeneration, often carried through generations in a dormant state. He said there might be a homosexual person, and if they have siblings, they might not have, but he also claimed that it is a genetical, even though they didn't know genes, genetical problem, that it is hereditary. Freud in 1905 rejected his claims. He said it's not an illness, it's just regular part of sexual development. Rado in 1969 made a similar but more Darwinian claim. He says there's a purpose of reproduction, and anything out of any sexual attraction outside of the reproduction, there has no evolutionary merit. Therefore, any behavior that is outside of reproduction was it's a pathology, was an illness, is a deviation. Rather, although he didn't call homosexuality, he called it homogeneous pairing, was a deviation from male-female natural design. You're going to start to see with the narratives of pathology, the claims and theories becomes more dangerous and more of yet claiming that it is a bigger problem. And later on that we will see that people will try to even treat. Red also claimed that homosexuality is in every form was trying to mimic heterosexual encounters. We now know that in some cases it might be true, but not always. It is another stereotypes, because most of the analysts, even Freud, even Bowlby, Rador, they seen feminine gay man, which it was the only thing that visible and only thing that they could tell it from outside. This is my explanation. But therefore, lots of narratives of pathology goes through stereotypes. And there were no regard of explanation for the danger, not danger, sorry, there's a mistype there, gender roles and gender identities. Another claim is that there was a biological drive for mimicking heterosexual relationships that cannot be oppressed by environmental factors causing homosexuality. Such claims influenced many psychoanalysts for decades. A good example is from the study from Bieber et al. In 1962. They conducted an empirical study that compared homosexual analyses to come and heterosexual ones. It is a quite good study because it takes away bias and judgment. You will see why. They find Bieber's findings, let me see, yes, Bieber's findings claim that marital relationship is a determining fact, especially in male homosexuality, similar to Freud's claims. So Bieber says it's mother and father. There are another biological claims of pathology, which, since that I'm talking mostly about psychology, that I won't talk about many other theories, but this one is important. Derner was an endocrinologist studying rat behavior. And you're gonna think, what is the rat behavior will do is with the human sexuality. He made series of theories and assumptions. And he says, rat brains govern by male and female behaviors. Is it similar, the stereotypes? For example, mounting another rat is considered a male behavior, while other rat is also called lordosis, which in human cases and homosexual was a female behavior. But you will see there's a problem here, which is, if you look at the cultural interpretations of homosexuality, many cultures do not, just like as the example of the rat here, that some man who is exhibiting masculine behavior is not considered homosexual. So he naturally assumes same kind of behavior and says, only the one that is mounted here is a female one is lordosis. By changing the hormones of the rats from the first day they're born, he created lordosis rats. Later, he took his findings and generalized it into humans. He said that hypothalamus is either can be masculinized or feminized during perinatal period. Hence comes the homosexuality or heterosexuality. But let's try to see what is right and what is wrong with this. There is no evidence rat psyche is viable template for a human psyche. There are many studies that is made, no hormonal differences between adult heterosexual and adult homosexual individuals. Dorner's claim, another claim that he made later on, he said, the fetus during the pregnancy, if seen in maternal stress, might cause homosexuality. Researchers like Gordon and Bine tried to replicate his claims, they could not. But this, by the time it was published, it takes so much attention from psychiatrists and analysts. And then there were even some actual psychosurgeries, some tests on animals that they try to take some animals and they try to make them heterosexuals. Because if it works, they wanted to try it on humans. This was inhuman, and there were severe personality disturbances happening, and in light of protests. But in 1989, this is also around the same time that DSM, which is Diagnostic Statistics Manuals of Psychological Disorders, removed homosexuality, and the World Health Organization as well, they started to remove homosexuality as a pathological disorder and some normal variant. He went back on his claim. His concept of teratopsychological view, which no longer valid despite his early claims, and he never even said. He has this famous paper and opinion published, but his previous work was, he didn't talk about it, why it was right or why it was wrong. Again, let me remind you, what I'm telling you about the narratives of pathology can be taught into research students what not to do, in my opinion. This is my opinion, of course, because it is easier to find, or it is, you can have a theory and you can test your theories, but there must have a data, there must have an understanding, there must have an actual basis to support your claims. And in subjects such as this comes with cultural, philosophical, political, religious problems that changes and opens so many ways of discriminate, even harm people. Friedman, in 1988, a psychoanalyst, again, made a similar model to Derner. Friedman believed that female traits were a result of stress during pregnancy. You see, most of the models here talks about, again, masculine and feminine traits. He hypothesized that feminine self-concept consists as a gender identity disturbance. In a while, we will see about gender identity disturbance. I will talk a little bit on that. He claimed that throughout adulthood's condition, homosexuality may be fixed and correct itself, but some of the same-sex attraction might remain same. Remember the paper that I mentioned on Kinsey's about some people just had some experiences before adulthood and they never had. So it is really easy to take some kind of a data, or it is really easy to talk about some examples and make generalizations which might not be true. This brings me to DSM. DSM, just let me repeat again, American Psychiatric Association, APA, in a long tradition, has publishes a book, Diagnostic Statistic Manuals of Psychological Disorders, which is some kind of a therapist or psychologist Bible, because if you are to understand what is the latest research, what is the specifications of disorders and problems, you go and open DSM. This is also, if we talk about the earlier, there was a pathology of sexualia that I talk. It was something similar, but it was try to focus on the sexual deviances. But DSM, by time it changed, because it comes from a scientific way of seeing data and seeing what research drives. But that doesn't stop that EPA to list it in DSM-1, the first version, homosexuality as a paraphilia, which is sexual perversion or sexual deviation. In the second version, they called it as a sexual orientations disturbance. In the third version, they have something called ego-dystonic homosexuality, which is, in today's terms, type of anxiety disorder that people would think that they would have anxiety symptoms if they feel that they're homosexuals, and that creates a problem in their life. And the DSM-3, the R version, they removed it entirely. You're going to start to see that after the third version, after the APA started to take out entirely homosexuality as from the pathological handbook, now the scientific society people, therapists or professional, they start to go through the narratives of normal. Let me check how much time that we have. Okay, I think we are...
Denise, we have plenty of time. It's 7 o'clock. You have a whole time.
Good. Because
it's very interesting. I think that we learn a lot of things, not only for different sexual orientations, but for the history, what has happened in the past.
Exactly.
And not the therapeutical procedures. Not all of them were scientific, but it's also a course about the history of the science.
Yes, there is also one more thing that we have to emphasize. I know that I've been talking about problems in people. We are critically evaluating their models and theories. And I'm trying to point out the shortcomings of these models and theories. I will try to do a similar thing even in the normal variant as well. But science learns from mistakes, or this is what we are hoping to do so. Therefore, that even though some of the models and theories and views is unthinkable to us now, it is a way for us to, know that what happened and build on it. That's why it is important, especially for mental health professionals, especially for teachers, especially for people who are dealing, especially for, you need to understand the LGBTQI plus people's, how people treated them. You can just look at how science treated them, and you can have pretty much an idea of what's going on. Let's talk about normal variants. That this isn't normal variant arguments claims that homosexuality occurs naturally. It mostly consists counter-arguments versus pathology, heavily criticized claims of treatments. Because if you think something is normal, you wouldn't have a theory about it. If you think about it, if it's normal, you don't need a theory. And that's why most of the narratives of normal variant is counter-arguments made against narratives of immaturity and narratives of pathology. One of the strongest arguments against are the claims made by Kinsey. I've been talking about Kinsey on the beginning of this talk because, let's see, he claimed that clinical observations are measure of the outside of clinics. Evanly Hooker in 1957 built a research on Kinsey's observation. And I think I just did a mistake on pathology section talking about one research. I meant to talk about the Evanly Hooker's research, not the other research. She administered 30 tests to gay men and heterosexual men, and blind judges evaluated the test results. But they did not know if the findings belonged to a gay man or a heterosexual man. You know what they find? They find that gay men did not show greater psychopathology than heterosexual ones. Normal variance narratives often use things like left-handedness as an example. So it might be a valid argument because we know that in some cultures, left-handedness comes with the biological superstition that it is something bad, something frowned upon, something they force people to write with their right hand. But if you see a left-handed person, how can you make the distinction between they're good people or not? So normal variant of homosexuality often normal variant narratives makes often this claim: it is just like left-handedness. Who decides it's normal? Who forces so-called children to so-called treatments? So who forces a person and why? And the same argument can be made about who thinks it's pathological, who forces a person to change. So another question to ask, is change desirable always? In terms of gender identity. Havelock Ellis was a Victorian man and pioneer of sexologists. Similar to Freud, he believed bisexuality was prevalent on everybody. His claims were that the deviations of sexual acts, such as homosexuality, replaced the desire for coitus. So basically, he said, we all have desire to have sex. And sometimes we use these desires to pleasure ourselves. And this might be outside of heterosexuality, and it is just healthy as heterosexuality. He used the example of colorblind person. It's just different from something else. It does not change how they operate, but obviously because of when it comes to reproduction, it has its own challenges. So he claims that it's just a biological variation. So again, I come back to Kinsey. Kinsey originally was an insect taxonomist, but he was an empiricist. He thinks that we cannot understand, and we cannot, if we try to judge homosexuality only from the eyes of inside the clinics, we cannot understand the whole picture. Yes, that might give us an idea. Yes, there might be some validity there, but it cannot be generalized into general public. So actually with his talk with his students, he decided to come up with judgment-free way of, empiricist way of seeing human sexuality. He used actually one of the methods that is used with the Darwins in 1959 to observe what he did, observations, variations within the species. There is no right, there is no wrong, there are just behavior. And he said, how can I look? How can I try to understand this? So he come up with a Kinsey scale. I think it was there were 7 different persons. So there wasn't just masculine or feminine or heterosexual or homosexual. He uses bisexuality, mostly homosexual, heterosexual, people with some experiences of heterosexuality, people with some experience with homosexuality. He asked this question to everyone. And he treated every sexual behavior as variations of normal, just like skin color or hair. Let me read a really good quote from Kinsey. He said, there are some who engage in both heterosexual and homosexual activities in the same year, or in the month, or in a week, or even in the same day. World is not to be divided into sheep and goats. Not all things are black, nor all things are white. It is a fundamental taxonomy that nature rarely deals with discrete categories. Only human mind invents categories and tries to force facts into separated pigeonholes. The living world is continuum in each and every one of its aspects. The sooner we learn this concerning human sexual behavior, the sooner we shall reach a sound understanding of the realities of sex. There were other studies who studied cross-cultural responses about homosexuality. I could spend cultural interpretations on homosexuality many hours. Because especially with the monotheistic religions and how they look at homosexuality, world has a different idea in times. For example, in ancient Greece, that it was a rite of passage. I think there is a specific tribe in Papua New Guinea, or I might be wrong about the place, there's a specific tribe that in order to achieve the ultimate masculinity, the young adults has to go homosexual experiences with the older men continuously for some time. This was a culture. And it was a norm for them. Fordham Beach in 1951 and 1958, the 21 of 78 cultures disapproved homosexuality, while 48 cultures approved some forms of homosexuality. Let me remind you the examples of, in some cultures, that some of the masculine man who has homosexual experiences are not considered homosexuals or LGBTQI plus in this. In some cultures, I think in Africa, there's a culture that is mainly disapproved homosexuality between man and man, but welcome between women. I've been talking about psychoanalysts mostly, and there are many people, but few psychoanalysts also integrated normal variant into their formulations. I say model claim that children at ages of 3, 4, 5, and 6 assume opposite gender features that attract, sustain, and attention of the father. His view was that this was a normal adaptation. It's not a pathology. if we go into the modern research, which I try not to too much, there are many models and theories and with neurology and biology. But to finish our talk, I would like to talk to you about a study that came out in 2019 by Rahman et al. Rahman and his colleagues, or her colleagues, I'm not sure. Rahman and the colleagues, by using a BBC's website, did a cross-cultural sexual orientation study with 28 nations. They have an open access paper, which is available to everyone. You can go and just take a look. They ask people about sexual experiences and how that their education, their country, their cultural, if there's any effect. I want to show you this, which is, in here you see the results table from their research. If you see, hello?
Ναι, 3 λεπτά. Θα έχω γυρίσει νωρίτερα, απλά θέλω να έχω ένα περιθώριο, γιατί...
I think we can hear you.
Το webinar το επόμενο.
Hello? We can hear you, I think. You're not muted. Hello? Okay, let me try to continue. You're gonna see the first column here is the heterosexual people. You're gonna see it's 74, 67, 78%, 74%, 75. It varies between the 71 to, I think, 89. It's pretty close, isn't it? Let's take a look at moderately attracted same-sex. This can be bisexual people. This can be, there are many categories in between. It's from 19%, 0.019%, and then look at the predominantly attracted to same-sex. As you can see, when they did a cultural study, the findings or the percentages of the people almost regardless of cultures, how they were raised, if they had trauma or not, it's pretty similar to each other. But even this study has to be looked critically. When I mean critically, most of today's sexual attraction research are done by asking people. There are methods, for example, to see their neurological responses. People's or shown people's their heart rates, but this study is made with the self-disclosure method. People anonymously told their preferences. And then we know that there is a big issue about disclosing one's sexual identity or their genders or their preferences in public. Therefore, even though this is an indication that we should not get data and we should look at it critically. And I think that's it. I was wondering if you have any questions.
Να πούμε στους φίλους τηλεθεατές ότι αν υπάρχει κάποια απορία μπορούν να μας τη γράψουν στο chat. Νομίζω ότι όλα όσα ακούσαμε ήταν πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέροντα. Έτσι μπορείτε τώρα να το γράψετε στο chat στο YouTube. So, Denisa, I think that what we have heard is very interesting, actually, and in my opinion, you gave us a very precise image of what is going on in the field of psychology. One question that is raised, according to me, is the relation between this ISQ that you have just explained with gender studies.
Now, gender studies is such a, yes, of course, there is a relationship, there's a relation, but gender studies is such a large subject. I'm not sure if I get exactly what are we talking about. Are we talking about psychological aspect of it? Are we talking about sexual research? Are we talking
Gender
about...
studies is also it is also included in philosophy, where we're trying to define what is gender, the differentiation between the biological gender and the social gender.
Exactly. In here, today I actually was also thinking about talking about a little bit of queer theory, which is a response to all these narratives, politically and philosophical and cultural and religious, and people says that the term of normacy or normal, it is defined by the majority of the population. In queer theory terms, there is a heteronormative world that heterosexuals, the majority of the heterosexuals define what is acceptable and what is not. And therefore, even most of the classifications or most of the research and data done within the heterosexual normative thinking in mind. Therefore, it might not be correct way to look at it. It is also, let's say, it is also a way to refute all of the research done before. It is also a way to not accept and rebel against heteronormative way of thinking. It is the things like marriage between man and woman, or things like people can be attracted to only opposite gender, or there are even, for example, I'm sure most of us seen on social media or even our email, some people says he, him, his, but some people says they, them. They use different pronouns. It is part of what queer theory and bring it to us. They say even he or she implies a gender. And I don't want to be defined by gender, therefore I'm going to use a genderless pronoun. But about the gender studies, this came out as a result of the whole what science viewed as etiology, or how we treat, or how LGBTQI plus people treat it. But if we have a specific question, I can try to go deeper.
Another question, homosexuality was regarded as a mental disorder. Now, how do we define just as a mental, as a sexual deviation, apoplexy, as we say in Greek?
Well, I cannot talk about individual people or group of people, but I can tell you this. Narratives of normal, variants of normal, it is pretty much accepted by scientific literature, and it is considered not perversion or deviation. It's just norm. It's just normal, just like being right-handed or left-handed. But this acceptance or can change with people, with the group they belong to, the school of psychology or school of thought that they subscribe to. For example, I know there are some psychologists still think that homosexuality is a narcissistic, it's some form of narcissistic personality disorder. I personally disagree, but it doesn't matter if I agree or disagree because it is not a valid scientific argument. In order to do that, we need to show evidence. And evidence seems to be showing that it is just like right hand, just left hand, it is a variance of normal.
So we have also a question from Anna Maria on the chat. She's asking, are you familiar with the term non-binary? Can you explain what this term exactly means?
Sure. Male and female. This usually comes with the queer theory a lot. It is the sex or gender that is, you can be male and you can be female. And this is called binary. Some people says they're not men, they're not women. They come out as something in between or something outside of these terms. So non-binary people, or most of the time they call themselves queer people as well. It is used synonymously, used to define outside of male and female gender and sex.
So, one more question. Give me a second. Therapy. Therapy is about changing sexual orientation. You said before that in the past there were methods non-scientific. For people, they believed that a gay could possibly become a straight. In current scientific, by using the current scientific method, we try to help our client to get on well with his deviation, to face the prejudices from the social environment, which is the therapeutical approach to these issues.
There are still some school of thought that still thinks that homosexuality is a pathological problem. Therefore, they try to fix it. But there is one thing that we know. It doesn't work. People tried. People are still trying today. And most European countries, even I think UK, recently banned conversion therapies. This is called conversion therapies. But you must understand, most of the conversion therapies, or in USA, I think they have these conversion camps, tries to change behavior, but they are rarely successful. And then how do you define successful? Do you define successful conversion as a person who does not show interest from outside? So a person became, let's say, asexual person. Do you think they are cured? Even the religious communities, they are starting to see there is, if you look at the literature, you will see, or things are done, homosexuality is a sin, but if you don't act on it, then you are straight kind of results are not actually viable. And there's also Do we know that it works? How do we define that it works is a different issue. And one more thing, that most of these kind of therapies are banned all over the world because these kind of therapies often forced on underage children by their parents. Therefore, if a person wants to go into such treatment and they desire this kind of an outcome, I believe that they should be able to make this decision for themselves. And there are many studies, the meta studies that we can take a look, which shows that it doesn't work.
One more question. Which is the causes of sexual orientation? Is the society, possibly our genes, a biological explanation? Is there any chromosome in our DNA related to our sexual orientation?
We don't know.
Don't know.
We don't know. That's why I told you many different theories and models, but we don't know for sure which one is definite truth. Like philosophical truth, you would argue, is what is true, what is fact, even that can be argued, but there is no definite answer. It is up to you to take a look and see the data available or come into conclusion, but we can only do this if we are informed. And information, we have to also look how it is collected. How do we come up with this information? How do we think that Freud is right, but Kinsey is wrong?
One more question from Martina, from the chat. To what extent does gender orientation clash with the law of a country? Is it possible to capitalize the good results for enforcing gender tolerance? She may think that in some cases there is a conflict between the law of a country and the sexual orientation of some citizens.
Look, I think 2 weeks ago in Georgia or Armenia, there was a pride and people were beaten up and some people were killed. If you go into countries with such as Iran and Saudi Arabia, and if you get caught, you get the death penalty. There's one side. There is another side that which the secular countries thinks that this is a variant of normal and it is a hate crime to act or discriminate, act differently a person. In fact, Greece in last couple of years has been taking many steps. They legalized civil partnership. I think a couple months ago, they passed a specific law to make sure that people in public, LGBTQI plus people in public sectors are not getting discriminations. So law seems to be changing and favoring the equality of people. But it is a thin line. What is equal that we must decide for ourselves? And I think we often try to rely on, there are different interpretations of the law. So it's calling some, for example, if you go to states, you will see many different cases of discrimination, people calling other people name and they call it freedom of speech. Or if there are some people that show opinion and then they're labeled as anti-trans, homophobic, but how do we come up with a sense of our own understanding of this? The real important issue here, how your mother draws the line, what is acceptable. But law seems to be necessary to reduce amount of discrimination, hate, and violence towards LGBTIQ plus people.
Also, you are a psychotherapist. Have you ever met in your life cases of prejudice and discrimination for people with different sexual orientations?
Yes. I mean,
Their impact on these people, their
so
psychological state after
what
this.
I do is I am a volunteer psychotherapist for a non-profit organization called Cause GL, located in Ankara, Turkey, which they are trying to provide psychosocial support to LGBTQI plus refugees. So I've been working with many LGBTQI plus people. So there seems to be different discriminations or different expectations from both genders about how they see and how they treat others, and it comes out in therapy. But I believe coming this out in therapy, even if they have thoughts or feelings, or even if they have hate, it's something that can be discussable and something that can be changed, because hate is not a natural stance that I believe.
Also, from your experience as a psychotherapist, which is the most common age where children, they may discover that they are not attracted to a male or a female partner, but possibly there is a boy that is attracted to other boys? Can we see it in the ages of 7, 8 years old?
I'm not a child psychologist, or I'm not working with young adults. Therefore, the only experience that I know, that how my clients thinks that they know. But from what I read, there are some cases, people from age 2 to 3 to 4, that they're aware of their attractions. But oftentimes in Western civilizations, because this can change from country to countries, comes in adolescence, that people discover their sexuality. And in some cases, they also experiment with it. They decide, they go. There's a process called coming out, establishing a self, and finding people, dealing to learn with hate. So unfortunately, there is no easier, or there is no one answer, because like I said, what we said, science is about generalizations. Therefore, when we are making generalizations, we have to be quite careful, because we cannot assume or say, it's age 18 to 15. In which country, in which psychosocial are they married? Do they have children with families? Is it in different race, or different hair, different color, different religion? This can change.
Also, we have a very interesting conversation in our chat. We have some of our viewers, they're chatting about their identity, and I think it's very interesting. Also, a friend of us, he points out that I think we could not be needing gender tolerance enforcement with correct education, but naturally to grow up with tolerance for other people, no matter if they're of their orientation.
So you're right, but the issue at its core comes into saying, how do we deal with racism? Does it stop when we make laws that you cannot be racist, you cannot hate? This is the reason why that we are having this talk. June was the Pride Month. This is why that we are getting informed and learning. And what I'm hoping is that our viewers will just relax and think about how do they treat, how do they see. Remember the first couple slides, is there a hierarchy? If they see two people in the street, how they do see them? So we need to do our own evaluations. But it is also impossible to regulate, the genders, people's behavior through gender. Because I'm not sure, can we regulate aggression?
So let's see some more things. Give me a second. So when also we speak about different orientations, we have the issue of school, as we said before about children. How should these children be tolerated, not from their classmates, but from their teachers? In some cases, they just have fun of them, which is unfair. It's unfair to have fun of any children. How can a teacher support a student in that situation who is trying to find his sexuality? And maybe maybe we have a boy that there are suspicions that he is possibly a gay. He's attracted to another boy, and the other boy, he makes fun of him, or all this stuff. What could be the role of the teacher?
This is a question that a child psychologist is more equipped to answer than me. But there are many things to consider here. It is a confusing time for a person to figure out they are outside of so-called, in quote marks, normal, or what they are feeling is not same as other people's expectations or other people's feelings. So I believe in here, the family here, the other friends, but in a way that we must be role models. Not that to favor that person, but we need to give some kind of education. We need to be informed about this. We need to be able to tell a children, and I think there is no problem in that. Look, there are two genders, biological genders, man and woman, and it is normal for a man and woman to be attracted to each other. It is normal to man to be attracted to each other, to marry each other, or have relations. So if we have this normacy around us, we can pass it to children. But other than that, if you're looking for a specific advice, I will refer to you a child psychologist or someone that is more equipped to deal with this, because I'm afraid to make assumptions that on a topic that I'm not really familiar.
But this one, in my opinion, in the universities, also in the pedagogical schools, in the university, we have several courses about psychology, and there are also very interesting seminars like this one that we're conducting right now, where people from the field of education, they can get scientific information and ideas about how to handle and manage those issues in the school environment.
Yes.
I think, in my opinion, every child should be supported, no matter of its orientation. Or, I have a theory saying that which team do you support, which is your religion, your favorite color, food, and your sexual orientation, it's a question that should be answered just because I like it. There is not any explanation. If you are Panathinaikos or Olympiakos, it's up to you. It's your preference. Just I think the same thing happens with sexual orientation. It's much more scientific than a simple the simple example that I have just given. But it's just up to you.
Yes, but I also think that universities have a specific duty that talks like this, information like this, discussions like the one that we are having should be more frequent. This is a really a sensitive subject, which can make many people happy and this can make many people unhappy. But most of the psychological talks that we are making, listening, it's about depression and anxiety. Although they are important topics, there must be more. There must be information available. There must be discussions. There must be different people that is encouraged to do research on this.
Λοιπόν, Χριστίνα Ερατός, she has a question about intersex. Is a gender besides woman and man? Intersex, I have never heard this term.
Some people that they born with not just male or female reproductive organs. Sometimes some people they have different feelings of gender throughout time. And it is a really good, valid point. They are one of the most invisible people because, and sometimes it comes with lots of self-worth, self-issue problems because of they might have both organs, they might have some problems with their reproductive functioning, which is, it is part of the LGBTQI, the I that comes from the intersex. Mm-hmm. They are part of this community and there is not much research and there's not much information about how they're living, how they're talking, especially countries, religious countries like Turkey, Greece, and we don't know, we need more information and data about that.
Mm-hmm. So then one friend of us is writing intersex is a term that describes people that are born with both male and female biology. And I think that we have raised many questions. And the chat is currently very interesting. In your opinion, I think that we have made many steps in how we tolerate these people. Some years before, even in Greece, different sexual orientation was unacceptable.
Yes.
Society.
Let me tell you, we are having a discussion, and you are a scientist. But even when you use the word tolerate.
Yes.
So this is what we are talking about. Yes, there are many advances made, but do you tolerate another Greek? Or do you tolerate another Turkish? Do you tolerate woman? Do you tolerate men? So I'm not trying to call you out, but it's that many advances are made, but still that in a way we use the children and psychosexual development in a way that we always point and finger, don't we? Mm-hmm. And we say, this needs to change. Because
it's a stereotype, actually. There are stereotypes with
same kind of. Yes. And in terms of equality against the law, yes, we made many, but in terms of the treatment of others, there are so much to improve on, I believe.
We just have to accept everyone as he is and love him with all his advantages and disadvantages, as we are only, all of us, we're just people.
True, I agree. And I am giving this talk and I have similar way of talking. I have similar way of sometimes pointing out. Sometimes I make homophobic remarks, even though sometimes I don't even make remarks and I think myself, oh, was that the correct way to say? What happened? So it is a little bit, we must be aware of the way that we treat them. And one more thing. Today we talk about many things, but nobody asks about asking a person about their sexual orientation. Is it okay? Should we assume? What should we do? There is also positive, stereotypical positive experiences. We think it's positive, but it's actually, again, in another way of discrimination. It says, we saw a feminine gay person and it was like, yes, kind of, or we make fun of them. We expect a gay man or to be girls' best friends. We have some expectations that we impose on LGBTQI plus people. And let me tell you that, although this talk is about LGBTQI plus people, there's also lots of stereotyping between from this community to heterosexual community that is debatable, but I think it is in our nature to evaluate what's around us and make categories and put them and behave it in that way.
And one last question before we close today's seminar. It's at about 5 minutes before 8 o'clock. For those people who are alone because of their sexual orientation, which could be your advice? Which would be your advice to those people? They feel alone because their family has rejected them as personalities. Possibly some of them, they don't even have friends. You're a psychotherapist.
Sometimes if it feels like you're alone, but you're not. You have people like you. There are many nonprofit organizations, government agencies, sport groups, therapists, friends that understand you, that is here to help. Sometimes a rejection from family, especially from family, it's a big trauma. There are many cases of people thrown out from their houses. There are many homeless LGBTQI plus people. There are many LGBTQI plus people that is forced to do sex work because they cannot find work. But like you said, times are changing. The law is changing. And if you just Google it, you will find many groups and foundations, many support groups and social workers and therapists that is here to help you. Today, we didn't even talk about the prevalence of psychological problems like depression, anxiety, like suicide, the crime. These are important. There is a big issue, but it gets better. It gets better with help, with the community supporting.
There is an issue with your internet connection, as I can see, but I think that everything is clear. Now I think it's okay now. It's okay now. It's okay now, we can see. Your picture was a little bit unstable because of the connection. Denise, I would like to thank you very much.
Maybe.
Christine, I think we have learned a lot from... it was, in my opinion, it was a course today. It was a course. And I would like to invite your future colleagues, the future psychologists, to join us here in New York College to study this fascinating science of psychology. Να πούμε και εδώ πέρα για τους φίλους τηλεθεατές ότι στο New York College εδώ και αρκετά χρόνια λειτουργεί το τμήμα ψυχολογίας, το οποίο δίνει αναγνωρισμένα πτυχία σε συνεργασία με αναγνωρισμένα ξένα πανεπιστήμια, πολύ μεγάλα πανεπιστήμια. Και όποιος θα ήθελε να σπουδάσει αυτή την πραγματικά καταπληκτική επιστήμη, η οποία έχει τεράστιες δυνατότητες απασχόλησης τα επόμενα χρόνια, μπορεί να έρθει στο New York College και να ενημερωθεί σχετικά με όλες τις παραμέτρους της φοιτησής. Λοιπόν, αγαπητές φίλες, αγαπητοί φίλοι, να ευχαριστήσουμε τον σημερινό μας ομιλητή, τον Ντενίζ Γιάννικ, να το ευχηθούμε και καλή επιτυχία στη συνέχεια της διδακτορικής του έρευνας, σύντομα να είναι και αυτός διδάκτορ του Πανεπιστημίου του Μπόλτον. Και εσάς και μαζί θα ανανεώσουμε το ραντεβού μας για την επόμενη εβδομάδα που θα συνεχίσουμε με νέα webinars. Μέχρι τότε, παραμείνετε κάντε subscribe στο κανάλι μας, στο YouTube, κάντε μας like στο Facebook, αλλά και όποτε θέλετε, περιμένουμε να σας γνωρίσουμε από κοντά. Λοιπόν, Denise, I would like to thank you once more from the bottom of my heart for all this, for the knowledge that you shared with us. Και εμείς, αγαπητοί φίλοι, θα είμαστε μαζί την επόμενη εβδομάδα.